With our game plan intact from our previous video, let's deploy active passive failover using Firewall 1 and Firewall 2. All right, and here we go. Now, first thing I want to do is take a look at the actual interfaces that we're going to use. So if we click on the Network tab, over on the left, we have interfaces. It's currently selected. And at the moment, these firewalls have not had any configuration done whatsoever except for a management IP address, which I assigned. And so we are going to be using 1/1 on the inside, 1/2 on the DMZ, 1/3 on the outside. And our plan, based on our plan, we're going to use interface 1/4 for the HA1 link and 1/5 for the HA2 link. So let's go ahead and specify the interface types for those two. We'll click on interface 1/4 and we'll specify the interface type, that it needs to be an HA interface. So in the PCNSE videos, we covered TAP and virtual wire and layer 2 and layer 3. And here, we want to specify a type of HA, take all the other defaults, click OK, and we'll do the same thing for interface 1/5. We'll click on interface 1/5. We'll specify that it's going to be a type of HA, and that way, when we configure HA, those two interfaces will show up as being available for HA1 and HA2 respectively. All right, so with that in place, let's go ahead and click on Device, because that's where we're going to go to configure the rest of our high availability. So with Device selected here on the top, over on the left, the second from the top, right under Setup is High Availability. So we'll click on High Availability, and then we have 3 tabs. General, HA Communications, where we assign the IP addresses to the HA interfaces, and then Link and Path Monitoring. Let's go ahead and do the general setup first. There's gears for each of these sections. So we'll just go through them in order. So in the setup section, we'll click on the gear icon right here. And we want to enable HA. So we'll put a check in that checkbox. And then it wants a group ID. And let's use group 1 for this HA pair. And then it's asking us about the type of deployment. Do we want to do active passive or active active? So for this demonstration, we are going to do active passive. And now it's asking us regarding the config sync, what is the IP address on HA1 of the peer? Well, currently it's nothing yet. But we need to assign one, and that reminds me, I don't think we put that into our plan. So let's set up a plan right now. So HA1, let's use the IP addressing space of 10.44.0.0 with a 24-bit mask. And for Firewall 1, we'll use .11. And for Firewall 2, let's use .12. And also while we're at it, we're going to need some IP addresses for the HA2, that link as well. So for HA2, let's use 10.55 with a 24-bit mask. So as part of our plan, let's use that IP addressing. So here, when it's asking about the HA1 IP peer address, this is us on Firewall 1 being asked about what is the peer address that's going to be over on Firewall 2. So that's going to be 10.44.0.12. So let's go ahead and put that in. So we'll put 10.44.0.12 for the peer. So I'm going to do the primary HA1 IP address, and I'm not going to specify another data plane interface for a backup, and we'll click on OK. All right, so under General, that's the Setup section. Now let's go down to Active/Passive Settings. We'll click on the gear icon to continue there. So the default here is shutdowns. Actually, either one would work. I'm going to choose Auto for this demo, and we'll click on OK. All right, then under Election Settings, that's where we get to set our priority. We'll go ahead and click on the gear. And this is Firewall 1, and our plan was a priority of 75. And let's enable Preempt. And also, this option right here is so cool, Heartbeat Backup. What this is saying is that if you're not using the management interface for HA1, which we're not, this can automatically do heartbeats on the management interface. So Firewall 1 and Firewall 2, both their management interfaces are in the same VLAN. And they're trying to identify, okay, which one of us died. Using the management interface here as a backup for heartbeats with ICMP is great. Now, if we do this, it's also important that on the management interfaces that we are allowing ping. Now, by default, it is. But if for some reason you disabled ping on the management interfaces, this would cause this heartbeat backup not to be effective, because if the management interface is not accepting a ping, it can't respond to a ping. And then that backup heartbeat would fail. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and check both those boxes. Priority of 75 on Firewall 1. I'm going to use the recommended timers and click on OK. And then I have some additional options here for SSH, which we don't need to touch. And let's go up to our interfaces that we're going to use for the HA. So the second tab here, under Device, High Availability, and now under HA Communications, we're going to specify the details for HA1. So we'll click on the gear to configure the details for that interface. And by default, it says, hey, you want to use the management interface? Which is perfectly fine. You could, but we already carved out an interface just for that purpose. So let's go ahead and use 1/4, and then we'll use the management for the backup heartbeats, which would be great. And now it's asking us locally, what is the IP address you want to use on your HA1 interface, Mr. Firewall 1. And it's 10.44.0.11. And then we'll tab down and we'll put a 24-bit mask in like that. And because they're directly connected, we don't need to worry about a gateway. And we'll click on OK. All right, that's done. We're not going to do a backup right here. So if we had yet another interface we wanted to dedicate as a backup for HA1, we could put that here. Let's go down to HA2, the data link. So we'll click on the gear for HA2. By default, it's saying, please enable session synchronization. And I've been working off and on with Palo Alto for many years, and they used to have an option called HA Lite, spelled L-I-T-E, like with like version 8 of the Palo Alto PAN-OS software. And I think like with the PA 200, that was my first firewall from Palo Alto. That's now end of life. And 8.x is also on its way out. But anyway, in the older version with HA Lite, it would support high availability, but it didn't support the actual session synchronization. However, in the current flavors that support HA, it is now supported. So we'll specify for HA2 that the interface we want to use is 1/5 based on our plan. And we're going to use the 10.55 address space for that. And this is firewall 1, so it's going to be 0.11 with a 24-bit mask. Great. We are directly connected back to back with firewall 1 and firewall 2. We don't need a gateway here. And we'll click on OK. Once again, we have an option for a backup for that HA2 link, which in the lab I'm not going to go and use. And then down below, if we were doing active failover, we would also want to set up the HA3 interface for packet forwarding. That's grayed out because we're currently doing active standby as opposed to active. All right, so if we scroll up and that all looks good. And the last piece here, the last tab is link and path monitoring. If we wanted to, we could set up path monitoring and send out ping requests periodically to a destination. And as long as those come back fine, we're okay. But if they don't come back, the firewall is going to think, oh, I've got a problem, and it can trigger a failover event. And so there's options down here for setting up a target that you can then go ahead and periodically ping, including how often to ping, how many pings to send to verify the path. There's also an option with link monitoring to actually look at specific interfaces on those links. And if they fail, that could trigger a failover event. So I'm going to leave these at their default. So here, I think we are set. So let me go ahead and click on commit, and we can preview our changes just for grins. So it's adding the two interfaces as type HA. That's great. It's then adding all the details for the high availability interfaces, HA1, HA2. It also has the IP addresses that we're associating. It also has our peer address here for group ID 1 for the HA pair. Has the priority of 75, heartbeat backup yes, and preemptive yes. All right, that looks good. I'll close that window, and let's go ahead and commit this. All right, now while that commits, let me close that window. While this commits, let's also go to the dashboard. And on the dashboard, let's add a widget for high availability. So we'll go to the dashboard, hit the drop down for widgets, go down to system right here, and then choose high availability right there. And currently it says high availability not enabled. That's because the commit hasn't completed yet. So if we wanted to check on the status of the commit, we could, of course, go down here to the task manager right here, click on tasks, and it is currently on its way. Or another way of checking to see whether the commit has finished or not is to go under monitor. And with monitor selected on the left, we could go down to system. And that's yet another way to verify whether the commit has finished or not. So here it's showing us our HA links are up. Oh, there we go, just finished. So the commit job succeeded. If we go down to the tasks here, that's going to confirm the same thing. And that can show us the details for the commit. All right, fantastic. So that's firewall 1. All we have left to do is configure firewall 2. So let's go back to dashboard. And now the commit's done on this high availability widget. We have a lot of things that are not green. And that's because the peer is not set up yet. So let's head over to firewall 2, and we'll do a very similar configuration over there, except we'll specify the appropriate IP addresses over on firewall 2. All right, so here we are at firewall 2, device name HAFW2. Let me also add the widget right here for a moment because we're here. Go to system and high availability, and currently it's not yet enabled. So let's configure it. Let's go to network first because we need to associate a couple interfaces for HA, 1/4. So we'll specify the interface type of HA. Click on OK. Then we'll do the same thing for interface 1/5 by clicking on it. For interface type, specifying it's HA, clicking OK. Great. And then we'll go to the device tab up here to configure the rest of our HA. So with device selected over on the left, we'll click on high availability. And then under the general tab, we'll go ahead and click on the gear associated with setup. So we'll enable HA. We'll use the same exact group ID as we did over on firewall 1. It's also going to be active passive. We're enabling config sync, and the peer HA1 address is 10.44.0.11, and we're not using a backup, so click on OK. That looks good. Active passive settings, I'm going to mirror the other side, so I'm going to use auto here as well. Click on OK. And for election settings, I want to give this guy, we planned on 100, so his device priority is going to be 100, which is worse than 75 on the other side, but I am going to use preemptive and heartbeat backup. So with preemption enabled on this firewall too, if the other firewall, if we change its priority to something higher than 100 in the future, this guy will automatically take over. And for the lab, it's a lot of fun. That way we don't have to wait to fail back after we cause a problem, because it'll do it automatically because of preemption enabled. So we'll click OK there, and then we'll go to HA communications, and we'll configure the details for HA1 and HA2 by clicking on the gear, specifying the interface we want to use for HA1, specifying our local IP address for that interface, which is 10.44.0.12 with a 24-bit mask, which is spelled like that in dotted decimal. And they're directly connected, so we don't need a gateway there. Click OK. And let's configure HA2 by clicking on the gear, specifying we want to use 1/5. The local address is 10.55.0.12. The mask for the IPv4 address is 255.255.255.0. I didn't modify the transport on the other one, so if I leave this as Ethernet, which is the default, we should be good to go. All right, so we'll click on OK. And then we left the defaults for link and path monitoring. Let me just verify my addresses. So HA1 ends in 12. HA2 ends in 12. The 1044 network, the 1055 network, that looks good to me. Under General, it's enabled, Group 1. And the peer is over at 1044.0.11. That's perfect. All right, so we'll go ahead and click on commit and click on commit again. And while that cranks away, let's go back over to Firewall 1. So while we're waiting for Firewall 2 to fully commit, this screen, the dashboard based on this, is going to refresh every 5 minutes. We could also just refresh this widget if we wanted to by clicking the refresh option here. And while we're waiting for it to finish, let's go ahead and talk about HA states. So here's one of them right there. It's active. That's the device that's currently active. Also down here, if you look right down here at the bottom, it's showing us next to tasks, it's showing us the current state. So it's active. On the other device, it should show up as passive once it's all dialed in and ready. And then there's what I think are some pretty funny options. There's one called tentative. It's like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what my state is. And that's the state it's going to go to when it's just leaving a non-functional or a suspended state. And a suspended state implies that we need an admin to go ahead and bring it up so it can then once again either be active or passive. But if it's suspended, it's just going to sit there until an admin takes action. All right, so let's click on refresh. Look at that. It's a lot more green showing up here. So it's showing the local is active, the peer at .12 is passive, and right here it says not synchronized. So if we wait a minute or two, it'll automatically synchronize. But let's go ahead and just force it. Let's click on sync to peer. It says, are you sure you want to overwrite the running config on the HA peer with the current running config on this device? Yes, I do. So once it's done, any configuration we have on this active firewall, like policies, security profiles, etc., those are going to be replicated over to the other device, which is currently passive. And what I would love to do to really bring this point home is in the next video, let's add some configurations to the active firewall, including maybe some NAT policies and some security rules and so forth that can allow functional traffic to go through the firewall. And when we make those changes on the active firewall and we click on commit, those will automatically be replicated over to the passive firewall. In this case, it's firewall 2. So we'll take that next step in this journey in the next video. So I'll see you there in just a moment. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.